On a freezing Christmas Eve, a young waitress notices an elderly couple shivering in the corner of her diner. They don't order food, only hot water. With barely enough money for herself, she makes a choice that will change her life forever. What she doesn't know is that the couple she feeds in secret are hiding a truth worth billions. No cameras, no witnesses, just one act of kindness, and an ending no one could imagine. Stay till the end, because this story proves miracles happen when no one is watching. Snow fell heavily on Christmas Eve, wrapping the small roadside diner in silence. Inside, the warmth barely reached the corners, and the smell of cheap coffee mixed with tiredness. Emily stood behind the counter, adjusting her faded apron, counting the minutes until closing. Christmas had never been kind to her. No family waiting at home, no gifts under a tree, just another shift to survive. Her parents had passed years ago, leaving her alone with bills, responsibilities, and dreams she kept postponing. Still, she smiled. Smiling cost nothing, and it made the long nights easier. The bell above the door rang softly, and an elderly couple stepped inside. Their clothes were thin, worn by years of use. The man leaned on a cane, his shoulders bent by age and cold. The woman held his arm tightly, her eyes scanning the diner with uncertainty. Some customers glanced at them and looked away. Others whispered. The manager frowned, already annoyed by their appearance. Emily noticed everything. She walked toward them with warmth in her voice and said, "Please, come in and sit wherever you like." They chose a small corner table, away from attention. When Emily handed them the menus, she noticed their hands shaking, not just from cold but from fear. Minutes passed, and she returned to take their order. The man cleared his throat quietly and said, "Miss, could we please just have some hot water?" His voice carried shame. Emily understood immediately. They were hungry, but dignity kept them from asking. Her heart tightened painfully. Christmas Eve was supposed to be about warmth, yet here were two people with nothing but the cold. Emily nodded gently and said, "Of course." As she walked back to the counter, she glanced at them again. The woman rubbed her hands together, and the man stared down, avoiding eye contact. Emily reached into her pocket and felt the small amount of money she had saved for her own Christmas meal. She hesitated only for a moment. No one should go hungry on Christmas Eve. She made a choice without knowing it would change everything. Emily stood by the counter pretending to clean, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about her empty apartment, the cold night waiting for her, and the small comfort she had planned for herself after work. Then she looked at the elderly couple again. The woman whispered something to her husband, and he nodded slowly, clearly embarrassed to be there. Emily felt something stronger than fear rise inside her. She walked into the kitchen and spoke quietly to the cook. "I need 2 Christmas meals," she said. The cook looked surprised. "Which table?" Emily replied without hesitation, "Mine." The cook paused but nodded. When Emily carried the plates to the table, the smell of warm food filled the air. The elderly woman's eyes widened in shock. "We didn't order this," she said quickly, afraid of causing trouble. Emily placed the plates down gently and smiled. "You don't need to. It's Christmas Eve. Dinner is on me." The man tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Tears welled up in the woman's eyes as she clasped her hands together. "Thank you," she whispered, as if afraid the moment might disappear. As they ate, Emily stayed nearby, refilling water, asking if they needed anything, treating them like honored guests instead of charity cases. They told her stories about their youth, about traveling together, about how the world used to feel slower and kinder. Emily laughed with them, listening as if she had all the time in the world. Other customers watched silently. Some felt ashamed, some felt inspired. When the meal ended, the elderly woman reached into her purse and pulled out a small folded napkin. Inside was a handwritten note. She slid it toward Emily gently and said, "Please read this later." Emily nodded, not expecting anything. There was no money, no promise, just gratitude. The couple stood slowly, thanked her again, and stepped back into the snow. Emily watched them leave, feeling warmth she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know that kindness given freely never leaves quietly. The diner closed shortly after, and Emily finally sat down, her legs aching, her heart strangely full. She pulled the folded napkin from her pocket and opened it carefully. The note read, "Kindness is the only true wealth. Thank you for reminding us what humanity still looks like." There was no name, no signature. Emily smiled softly. She folded the note and placed it back in her pocket, not realizing how important those words would become. She walked home through the snow, feeling lighter despite the cold. Meanwhile, the elderly couple sat in their car, quietly watching the diner from across the street. Their names were Daniel and Margaret Whitmore, owners of a global investment empire worth billions. Known for their modest lifestyle, they often traveled without revealing who they were, not to test people cruelly, but to understand the world as it truly was. That Christmas Eve, they wanted to see if kindness still existed without reward. Emily had answered that question without hesitation. The next morning, Emily returned to work, expecting another normal day. But the diner felt different. A sleek black car pulled into the parking lot, followed by another. Men in suits stepped out, their presence impossible to ignore. Customers stared. The manager rushed forward, nervous and confused. Then Daniel and Margaret stepped inside, dressed elegantly, no longer hiding. Emily recognized them instantly, her heart pounding. Daniel smiled warmly and pointed toward her. "We're here for her," he said calmly. Emily froze, unsure what was happening. Margaret walked toward her and took her hands gently. "You fed us when you thought we were nothing," she said softly. Emily felt tears forming, still confused. She didn't know she had just passed a test that money could never pass. The entire diner fell silent as Daniel spoke. "Last night, you gave when you had little. You gave without expecting anything in return." He explained who they were, not with pride, but with humility. Gasps filled the room as customers realized the truth. Emily's knees weakened as she struggled to understand. Daniel handed her a folder. Inside were documents, a check worth more than she had ever imagined, proof of a fully paid college education, a new apartment, and an offer to work with their charitable foundation. Emily's hands shook as tears streamed down her face. "Why me?" she whispered. Margaret smiled gently. "Because you didn't do it for a reward." The manager stood speechless, realizing he had almost turned them away. Customers wiped their eyes, some ashamed of how they had judged the couple. Daniel turned to everyone and said, "You never know who stands before you. Kindness should not depend on appearances." Emily hugged Margaret tightly, overwhelmed by gratitude. But what mattered most wasn't the money. It was the feeling that her kindness had meaning. She realized that one small choice, made from the heart, could echo louder than any act of power. That day, Emily didn't just receive a gift. She received a future. Emily's life transformed, but her soul remained unchanged. She went to college, studied hard, and moved into a warm home for the first time in years. Yet she never forgot where she came from. She framed the handwritten note and placed it on her wall, a reminder that kindness came before success. She worked with the Whitmore Foundation, helping people quietly, respectfully, without cameras or praise. Every Christmas Eve, Emily returned to the same diner. She paid for meals anonymously, watching strangers smile the way the elderly couple once had. She believed kindness should remain invisible. Years later, when people asked her how she became successful, Emily would smile and say, "It started with a plate of food." She taught others that wealth meant nothing without compassion. And on cold nights, when the snow fell softly, Emily remembered that Christmas Eve when she chose kindness over comfort, not knowing it would change her life forever. Because the greatest miracles happen when no one is